or you can go drop it in a box and it's, it gets put into the system. The voter response and the voter turnout in states right after they instituted vote by mail was somewhere around 80%. It's dropped off now to about 55% on average. But in states where they have voting at the polling locations, it's 35 and 40%. So when you take away the barriers to voting, people actually vote, right? And I mean, that's the thing that we all should be moving to, is all vote by mail. But the other thing they do in Oregon, which makes all the sense in the world, is that the Secretary of State will mail you a book, sometimes 2 books, depending on how many things are on the ballot. But they mail you a book that details everything that's on the ballot. And for $100, you can buy a page in that book to put your position on the issue. So if you're a pro or con on a ballot initiative, and you get a group of people together, you all pitch in $10 and you call yourself the Committee for Clean Elections, and you put a pro, statement in the voter pamphlet, it gets mailed to every household. And so there is no question about what's on the ballot. There's no lack of information. You get a book mailed to you as a voter. The other thing they do is they have what's called automatic voter registration. You have to opt out of being a registered voter. So you're automatically registered based on your driver's license.
Yeah, that's supposedly becoming law in Illinois. It was signed into law, and there's been zero movement on actually having it go into effect, as far as I can tell.
That's because you have a Republican governor.
We do, who's running for re-election in 2018.
Who needs to have his ass kicked.
Yeah, all of my friends in Oregon are so smug about their voting too. Every time we talk about going to vote, they're always so smug about, oh, I get to just drop it off in the mailbox.
So come back at him and say, yeah, well, you guys are decreasing the number every year as to the people who actually do drop it off in the mailbox. That's really great that you get to drop it off in the mailbox. Do it.
Well, and I wonder, we were talking earlier about taking kids to the polls, and I wonder if there is something about voting by mail that makes kids less aware of what's happening.
Well, I think that depends on the family culture, right?
Yeah.
So the one thing that we know, that we have evidence of and can have tested and tried to track, is that, when it comes to voting by mail, there are 3 times that people actually vote. So a portion of the electorate will vote just immediately upon getting the ballot. They'll return it within 2 or 3 days. So they get the ballot, they sit down that night, they fill it out, and they send it back. Then there's a portion that gets the ballot and puts it with all the monthly bills. So they do it at the same time that they do the rest of the bills, the family bills, right? It's changing a little bit because of bank ability to send bills like whenever, and you can pay bills online. But there's still that process, and that is a community thing, right? So they sit down and they're doing their bills and they're doing other family things. So they also vote. And then there's the portion of people who wait until the last minute because they want to get all the information, or because they just don't want to think about it until they absolutely have to, that fill out their ballots at the end of the process, right before the election is being counted, right? So in my experience, there's the group of people who gather their absentee ballots and they go to a collective place to fill them all out together. Usually that's a church. So the preacher will say in the pulpit, bring your ballot next Sunday, we'll fill it all out together. Not always a good thing for progressives, because you've got one person who's swaying the opinion of an entire collective group. But then you've also got families who have grandma's ballot, granddad's ballot, mom's ballot, dad's ballot, aunt's ballot, uncle's ballot, and they're filling it all out because it's a family thing, and the kids see that, right? And I think that becomes a standard for them. So I think there's an argument on both sides of it.
And I feel like you and I, Kelly, are the sort of people who would fill out our ballots and show our kids and be like, oh, look, I'm sitting down and filling out my ballot, and now I'm going to the post office and I'm mailing my ballot. Like you and I are the sorts of people who would do that. And I feel like there are other people who would, encourage their kids to watch them fill out their ballot.
I also know mothers in Washington State who, when their kids turned 18, they made sure that their kids got their ballot. And as soon as their kids got their ballot, they made sure that they filled it out and sent it in, right? And if you do that, it's no different than filling out a college application, right? It's like it is your responsibility now you're old enough to do this, you're registered, you're going to do this.
Yeah, I know in my house, if I didn't send it back right away, we'd probably lose the ballot. Every piece of paper that comes into my house, I like take a picture of it so I don't forget what it looked like.
Yeah, I wish we had vote by mail here. That would make all the difference in the world to me.
So, what are some of the barriers to Democrats getting elected in the South? Is a lot of it based on turnout? Are there other factors?
So there are a lot of other factors, and it really kind of depends on the state. I can speak from experience in Arkansas, and a little bit of experience in Texas, and a little bit of experience in some of the other southern states. But we're seeing this change quite a bit. The biggest barrier to Democrats being elected is that there was no bench. You know, in Arkansas, Democrats held the majority in the House, the Senate, the governor's seat for 100 years. Since the Civil War, Democrats have been in charge. And there was never a development of the backbench. There was always the acknowledgement and the nod, right? It's Jack's turn now. It's Joe's turn now. You know, his dad had the seat for this much time, and now it's his turn. You know, you you contribute the right amount of money to the right person, and you get acknowledged, and you know the right people. Then it's your turn to be the representative in office. Changed dramatically. There is no more anointment, and people are just kind of lost. They're like, what do we do now? So we're kind of at this rebirth period in Arkansas politics, and we've gotten caught up in the anti-messaging, whether just because the central theme of the Republican tenure has been, you know, Obamacare is bad. Every Democrat is a baby killer. You know, there's been all this negativity. We don't know. We think that we have to come up with the right terminology to combat those very issues, when in fact we don't. The chair of the Arkansas Democratic Party is a very smart man, and he said, I don't normally say somebody's a very smart man, by the way, just to throw that out there. This guy's a very smart man. And he says that Democrats need to be established for two reasons. I mean, you are a Democrat if you can think for yourself and you care about people. That is who a Democrat is. So we have to learn that when they call us baby killers, we don't have to respond with, no, I'm not. Right? Or, you know, this is my pro-life position. We have to learn how to respond with, the issues at play here are poverty, not choice. We need to create a sustainable system that gives people options so that we can actually address the root issue and not address this thing that they want us to address. So when you come at me about choice, I'm going to talk to you about jobs. When you come at me about gays being wrong, I'm going to talk to you about the fact that we have kids going to bed hungry every day, and our food insecurity is highest for seniors, and that we need to address that issue. And any other issue is unimportant. When you talk to me about any social issue to divide us, I'm going to talk to you about the infrastructure systems in our state and how we need to be concentrating on building and sustaining the roads that we have and giving people an ability to get to work instead of targeting them in some manner as if they're lesser than, right? So Democrats have got to learn how to capture that and stop worrying about what people are saying about them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't seem like just sort of arguing back with the same language is going to work in any case.
I will certainly say that our former First Lady actually had a bit of gold when she said, they go low, we go high. She just didn't define what high meant. It isn't, you can't talk to me in that manner, or I'm not going to talk to you about those things. It is, okay, if you want to talk about that, I'm going to talk about this, and let's see who wins, right? That and the fact that I'm going to work my ass off, and I'm going to show you that in this state, if you want to win, you have to work hard and talk to people, and that's how you're going to win, not call people names.
Well, that's great. Then everyone should just hire you to run their campaigns, and we'll have Democrats all over the South.
Now, that sounds a little pompous.
No, but I think, it makes so much sense. It sounds sort of deceptively simple.
Listen, we are emotional animals. We say when we're growing up and we get into fights with our brothers and sisters and they say, you're this, we say, no, we're not, right? That's ingrained in us. Our defense system is ingrained in us. What's not ingrained in us is to be able to spin and turn and talk about the things that are really important to other people and not get ourselves knotted up in a ball of tension over the fact that they're going to call me a baby killer.
I think that's valuable advice for not just political candidates either, but for anybody who's having a political conversation. I think it's really good to take a step back and say, okay, let's move away from my instinct to be defensive about the names that I'm being called and say, okay, well, if you're going to talk about that, I'll talk about this other issue that's important. That's really useful advice, not just for people running for office, but for anybody trying to convince anybody of any, political ideology.
We just have a hard time taking it.
Well, but everyone can sort of practice that a little bit on social media, I think. In a place where you're not face to face with someone, it's very tempting, of course, when someone says something you don't agree with on Twitter to sort of shoot back an answer. But there isn't any reason you have to do it immediately. You can sort of force yourself to just take a break and say, I'm going to come back and respond calmly in 10 minutes. And if you get a little more practice with that in that way, then maybe it becomes a little bit easier to do that then in person as well, when you do have to respond more quickly.
It's a tool and it's a device, and it takes a while to perfect.
All right. Well, I think listeners have homework for the week then.
There you go.
Not that we're all going to master it in a week, but, we do have, I'm sure, a lot of listeners going back in the next week to their families who perhaps they don't agree with on a lot of issues. So this can be good advice at a good time.
So thank you for having me on, though.
Yes, of course. We're so thrilled to have you on. And I hope that our listeners will stay tuned. We're going to have a second segment to this episode. We're going to do another profile of a woman who ran for and won office recently, Kristine Mackin, who was elected to her city council in Waltham, Massachusetts. So that will be our second segment of this episode.
Great.
Sarah, thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Same here.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Bye now.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the second part of the podcast on how to run for office, part 2. I'm Sophy, your co-host, and I'm here with Kelly, your other co-host.
Hey, everybody.
And joining us today is Kristine Mackin. She recently won an election for city council in Waltham, Massachusetts. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk a little bit about my experience.
Thanks for being on. We're very excited to talk to you. First, I'm wondering if you can just sort of give us a little bit about your background. Do you have any experience in politics before you ran for office?
I have almost none. My experience has prior to this, purely been an interest in it. I've always liked the behind the scenes sort of wonky details of politics. I moved to Waltham when I was in grad school, and most of my engagement was bothering my friends about you have to vote. Voting's the most important thing you can do. And sort of watching everything that was going on and trying to build people up to make sure they got informed and went and voted. But I hadn't ever worked on a campaign before. I hadn't shown up at City Hall ever, which is a little bit embarrassing to admit publicly, but the first time I showed up at City Hall was after I had already decided to run. So there was a big learning curve for me coming into this.
I think that's probably really heartening for our listeners. I think a lot of people are thinking about getting into politics now and might be concerned that, I haven't ever been involved in politics before. Can I start now? So that's good to hear.
Yeah, I would say you can and you should start now. You have to start somewhere, and there's no reason to let a lack of experience hold you back. It sure didn't for me. You have to get a foot in the door somehow. So why not this?
So you said you moved to Waltham for graduate school. This is fascinating to me that you have a PhD in biochemistry. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got from a PhD in biochemistry to running for city council?
Sure. My dad is also a PhD, and he teaches at a university, and I thought I was going to also teach at a university. But when I was in grad school, I was sort of looking around at the academic environment, both sort of the cultural fit issues with my personality and realizing that I didn't want to stay in the academic research track, and how hard it is for women in my field. Unfortunately, despite all of the advances we've made, it's still really tough to make it as a woman. Looking around and saying, I don't want to do this forever. And then thinking, well, I'd